Okay, greetings. I'm Julie Matthaei. I'm a board member of the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, and our network is hosting today's session. I really want to thank you for coming today, and I want to thank the conference organizers for putting this on. It was originally scheduled, the World Social Forum on Transformative Economics. It was scheduled for Barcelona at this time, and then we had the COVID crisis. It's been planned for a number of years, couple of years. And the COVID crisis happened and they ended up turning it into a virtual forum. And I'm just so grateful for all the work they did getting this to happen. I plan to speak for about 45 minutes and then have time for questions at the end. During the talk, if you have questions come up, please write them in the chat. And if I have a chance, I'll look at some of them during the talk. Otherwise, I will look at the end. I'm also gonna, if I have time, I'll ask a few simple questions during my talk just to get feedback on some of the main points. So I wanna say again, it's a pleasure and honor to talk to you today, especially because it's part of the World Social Forum on Transformative Economics. If there was ever a time in history when the world needs to think about economic transformation, it's the present moment. We are 4 months into the COVID crisis. Of the world's roughly 8 billion people, over 500,000 people have died. Hundreds of millions have been laid off or lost their jobs. And millions of small businesses have closed. The almost 2 billion people who work in the informal economy, that includes immigrants, farm workers, the gig economy, etc., half of the world's workforce are living more on the brink than they ever have been. We really don't know how these people are going to be surviving. Economic inequalities have heightened to almost absurd levels. We already had a huge level of economic inequality, and now you have, people in their country homes doing work on their computer, and you've got people on the front in nursing homes facing the possibility of death every day. And there's race and class and gender aspects of those inequalities that are being heightened as well. It's been just over a month since George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis policeman Derek Chauvin. A month of continued and sustained uprisings across the US and the world of Black, brown, and white people demanding an end to racist police violence, demanding abolition of the police, demanding transformation of the prison industrial complex. So these are happening on top of the usual crises that we have. Climate change, the polar ice caps are melting, the weather is changing, there's dust. Now you can't even see in Puerto Rico and in the south of the US, so much dust from the Sahara. Ecological destruction, species extinction, increasing inequality, precarity, and poverty, corrupt militarized governments, a war economy that's wasting so many resources and killing so many lives. We have persistent racial, ethnic, gender, and north-south inequality. And we also have everywhere isolation, lack of meaning, depression, alienation, the breakdown of community. We all have these personal health and mental health and well-being crises that are happening in the world. So now more than ever is the time for each of us, each and every one of us, to realize that we cannot continue doing life as usual. We cannot continue living our lives as we have been. And even the mainstream is saying we can't go back to the old normal. So what is the new normal going to be? So I want to go to my PowerPoint here and just show you a slide that it goes to a talk Ria Neisler has about, hold on, come on PowerPoint. Okay, if it does not work, I won't do it, but. Okay, there it is. Ria Neisler says, it's like we're on a sinking ship. This is our economy. This is our society. We have all these intersecting crises. We're on a sinking ship. Now, what do? Do we spend time competing with each other to get to the top berths of the ship? That is what capitalism tells you to do. Compete together, try to get to the top berths of the ship, try to struggle your way up. Even if we do, the ship is sinking. And then I'm thinking, well, really, the world economy is more like a slave ship, like the kind in the movie Ben-Hur, for those of you who are my age, where there are these slaves in the bottom rowing and chained in, and they're moving the ship, and the ship is sinking. And yes, we want to free those who are enslaved and in chains, but we don't want them just to move up in a sinking ship. And that you could say the same for women. We want women who have been enslaved, oppressed, beaten up. Do we want to just move up in a system that is not working? So that's my sinking ship metaphor. Thank you, Rianne. So you can remember that. We don't want to just move up in a sinking ship. Our ship is broken. We need a new system. The big question for all of us is, how do we get there? And how in our lives can we do things that help in this forward movement? And what I'm going to tell you today is there's things every one of us can do in our life to help be part of the movement towards a new and better system. So that is the hopeful aspect of my talk and of this point in history. It is a challenge to us. If we don't all move together, we're not going to be able to shift and build a new ship or build a new whatever we want to build. Maybe it's going to be a flying saucer, but we can't do that if we don't work together, but we all can do it. So the solidarity economy framework that I'm going to share with you today, it provides an answer. It provides a path forward out of these crises towards a just and sustainable economy. So that's what I find so exciting about this framework. And it's been around since the 90s, started in Latin America, then people in France started it. Now it's a worldwide movement. RIPESS, RIPESS.org, organizes the networks. So that's what I'm going to talk from, that knowledge, that whole body of knowledge and work that's been going on for 30 years. So the solidarity economy framework shows us that a process of systemic transformation towards a just, peaceful, sustainable, and democratic and free economy is already underway in the world. It's already happening. So to introduce the solidarity economy framework, first I want to step back and present a bird's eye view of the present moment. So first of all, we have a vibrant, global, liberatory movement of movements. That is, many, many movements, but they're coming together more and more. These movement of movements for systemic economic and social transformation. That's happening today. And the World Social Forum process is one of the ways in which these movements come together. Feminist, anti-racist, anti-colonial, ecological, you name it, movements coming together. The sub-movements in the movement of movements are very diverse. And they have many different names. Even the movement of movements, as it's congealing, has different names. The solidarity economy is only one. Some people call it, in the US, call it the new economy. Some people in Latin America, they call it Buen Vivir or Sumat Causa, which is an indigenous name. Agroecology, permaculture, community economy, many other concepts are used, but they're starting to describe this movement of movements for transformation. Okay, so I want to show you my next slide. Get rid of the boat. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is not where, oh, there we go. Okay, so the way I'm going to present this moment is that we're part of a historic paradigm shift. And the way I'm going to conceptualize the paradigm shift for you is it's a shift from inequality to solidarity, from a paradigm of economic and social life based on inequality to one based on solidarity. And The characteristics of the inequality paradigm. You know them. I was going to have you take time and put down in the chat what you think is part of the inequality paradigm, but I knew you would already know them. Every group I've talked to about this knows what they are. Hierarchy and domination. And it's not just in general, all these different dimensions: gender, race, class, man over nature, straight over LGBTQ, North over South, one religious group over another religious group, one nation over another nation, one ethnic group over another. So this paradigm, divisiveness, where it's us versus them thinking, tribalism, nationalism, us versus the immigrants, blacks versus whites, fear, insecurity, and greed. You've got greed running the system, greedy people getting in positions of power, people afraid of them, people afraid whether they're going to survive, lack of democracy, the corruption of supposedly democratic institutions, especially by the power of money, but also intertwined with racial and ethnic and North-South domination. Unfreedom. People really are not free. They think they're free. They can buy 1,000,000 trillion products if they have the money, but what real freedom do they have to exercise their full capacity? And as I said before, disease, unwellness, alienation from our bodies, our souls, each other, and the earth. So those are some of the characteristics. And sometimes I visualize the inequality paradigm like a prison. It's like a prison for our minds and our behavior. And we have these inequalities. Sorry, something is running through there, but man over woman, rich over poor, white over human, white over black, people of color, human over nature, and then all these processes which I've studied that reproduce inequality. It's not natural. It's not natural for people to be unequal. It is produced. It's produced through parenting. It's produced through schooling. It's produced through the prison industrial complex. It is produced through our workplace. It's produced through our media. So we're reproducing this inequality in this paradigm. Okay. Now, I want you to think in your mind, well, what are the characteristics of the solidarity paradigm? What could those qualities be? What is emerging with the different characteristics, different values? So just take a minute and think about that. And then I'm going to show you some of the lists that I have. So one of the things that definitely we're learning, equity, not just equality, but equity, fairness, and minimization of hierarchy in all dimensions. That's why I say inequality to solidarity. It's not just one kind of inequality we're working against here. We are learning to work against all kinds of inequality. Cooperation and sharing rather than competition. Part of the whole awareness, caring about the whole, oneness awareness. Social responsibility. You care about yourself and you care about others. We care about each other. What Bernie Sanders says, we're all in the same boat. There's many different ways. None of us is free until all of us are free. There's many ways in which this has been put. But it's not the pure individualism of capitalism. There is a sense of oneness, individuality within oneness, love and compassion for oneself and others, individual freedom and valuing of diversity. And the value of diversity is key. Not one cookie cutter thing, not one model of economics, not one way to be, but as I will show you later, certain values like these. And economic and political democracy, not just political, not just voting, participatory political processes, and economic democracy, which includes not having capitalists bossing workers around and production only serving the owners. So economic democracy is a very big demand and big part of it. Okay, so what we can say is we're in the midst of a transition between the inequality paradigm and the solidarity paradigm. We're somewhere there, and if you try to say, well, where does capitalism fit? Capitalism kind of in between. I like to think of it as we're stuck in between. We have these values of inequality. We have these wonderful movements. But capitalism itself is based on inequality. It's based on a foundation of patriarchy, of racism. It was built on slavery and dispossession of Native Americans. It's built on a class process. It's built on the idea of technology and science as domination of nature. So it's got all these inequality aspects, but it also has these values of equality and democracy and freedom. So it has these contradictions in a way it can't fill. And one of the ways you can think of that is right now in the electoral process, I mean, Bernie Sanders is out of the race, but he's still very actively trying to push Vice President Joe Biden to the left. I put him on the right here because he's towards solidarity, Bernie. But we have, obviously, Trump is way over there, pro-inequality paradigm in most ways, although he has a little libertarian aspect. And then we've got Biden more in the middle, and we have Bernie Sanders really pushing towards the solidarity paradigm, economic human rights, especially, getting people the right to health care, the right to education, the right to jobs. Okay, so, and you can also use the spectrum. It's interesting, instead of saying one system and the other system, if you use a spectrum, you can realize the process is going to take time. It's continuous. It's not like we go from capitalism to the next system. We go from inequality to solidarity. We are in a process of movement. We want to keep on that form of movement happening through what we do. So we need to get oriented and realize what part can we play in that transformation. And you can also look at countries. I've done some studies of this and try to get like a little scope. And you probably all know, like in the Western world, the Scandinavian countries are way ahead on inequality, except for perhaps on race, which they deal with in a very strange way. But in the US, we rank very poorly on most things. And I'm just going to skip through these. So the question here was, let me just stop the share. The question is, we see the spectrum. Hold on a second. Okay, hold on. Oh, I know. So I was going to say, the shift is happening, I believe, but it's been invisible. It's been invisible to economists, to people in my profession, and it's been invisible to a lot of progressives. To economists, mainstream economists, they cannot see it. Why? They assume that everyone just gets utility from goods and services. They say we need inequality. People are naturally selfish and materialistic. We have to have inequality to motivate them. Otherwise, they won't do anything. And capitalism is inevitable because of that. And Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had the famous statement, Tina, there's no alternative. Capitalism's it, we just have to accept it. So mainstream economists, my profession, has been terrible around. It does not even imagine a system change. And it is indoctrinating all these generations of college students in that view. Radical economists have also had a hard time seeing the system change. Why? Because they're using a 19th century model of revolution based in Marx, but other theorists as well. And in that model, revolution is based in class, just class organizing. Doesn't look at race and gender, anti-colonial organizing. It sees revolution as abrupt. All of a sudden it happens. You organize and you take over the state, and or the workers take over the means of production, and you have a change. Where that's not what's happening. And when that happens, it usually doesn't work very well. And thirdly, the radicals, the old style radicals, think that markets are a problem. They think we have to get rid of markets to solve the problem and to get to solidarity. And what we're finding is that's not the case. Seems like markets are not the problem, but it's the values and practices and institutions that are existing in the markets that are the problem. So next question. We see why it's being ignored. The old style view doesn't see it happening. What is causing this movement from inequality to solidarity? And there's many, many factors, but I'm just going to share two basic ones with you here. Where am I? Here I am. Okay. Oh, shoot, started me all over again. Sorry. I did apologize for not being highly technically advanced, but this is pretty bad. Okay, crises. One of the things that's causing the movement is these crises. We already talked about them. I don't have to go through them again. When you have crises, they're like points of pain, someone was teaching me. Points of pain, it's like, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working. But it's not just one point of pain. We have points of pain in every sector for all kinds of, our institutions are failing, so we have all these different points of pain. And the points of pain, okay, what do we do for climate change? What do we do to solve inequality? What do we do to stop war? What do we do to stop corruption? So people are asking those questions. And those points of pain are bringing us to think about new solutions. And those new solutions are starting to come together. And that's how we're getting, one of the ways we're getting this movement from inequality to solidarity. The other thing that's causing the movement is social movements. And I'm going to focus on what I call the 4 great social movements, but there are many other ones. And there's some in industries, like the movement of moms against Monsanto. I'm talking about here, just going to give some examples of the movements against inequality. The movement against gender inequality, looking at man over woman, social movement, feminism. Type of inequality, race, whites over people of color. Social movements, civil rights, anti-racist, anti-colonial, Black Lives Matter, class. Power categories, rich over poor. Worker anti-classist movements fighting that. Species inequality, man over nature. Ecology movement fighting that. So we have these movements, and they're very, very powerful. And traditional Marxism and leftist views from the 19th century only saw the class movement. They didn't see these other movements. They didn't think they were important. Now, when you look at the kind of politics that's coming out of the movements, I want to point out that identity politics is where the oppressed group is fighting against the oppressor group. So in the case of Black Lives Matter, it would be Black people saying white people are the problem. But solidarity politics, intersectional solidarity politics says, okay, people of color are against all the inequalities that oppress people of color. Or intersectional feminism, women are against all the inequalities that oppress women, not just gender oppression. Anti-classist, workers are against all the inequalities. Why? Whenever you organize these movements, you have people in them that have intersectional identities. Women are oppressed by race and class and gender sexual orientation. So when you get them together, they also want to organize against those other oppressions. So that is one thing that happens as the movements mature. You move from identity politics to what I call solidarity politics. And then what starts to happen is this last row, where you start to get, people start understanding there's all these different kinds of inequality, they're intersecting. So I have a politics, solidarity politics is against all inequalities. And there's more and more people in the US and in the world today that are in principle against all of these forms of inequality that are created by the inequality paradigm. They are directly resisting the inequality paradigm. They may be focusing on one aspect, on race or gender or man-nature, but they are aware of the other inequalities, that they are interconnected, and they oppose them. So this solidarity politics is huge. It's very important. It's like the ethics for this shift. It's the values that are driving the shift from the inequality paradigm to the solidarity paradigm. So I'm moving on here. So you're wondering what the solidarity economy is. So I'm talking about solidarity economies being built by the crises, responses to the crises, and by the social movements. What is a solidarity economy? So here's a tree representing the solidarity economy with its roots in the social movements. So this gives just a graphic representation of the solidarity economy. The second thing, as I was talking about the root of the solidarity economy, is a set of values. This is the precious core of the solidarity economy. The values we have, what is important to us. And if you think of capitalism, what is the basic value in capitalism? Money. Money is the value. And my profession says everything can be reduced to a financial number. Life, human life can be reduced to a number. Everything is a number, everything is money. Your goal in life to have more money, and then that's what you want to do. Solidarity economy values are very different. Deep equality in all dimensions. And I say deep equality because to realize what we really need to do to create equality is a lot more than get rid of discrimination. We have to change every institution, but that's what we have to do. We're making systemic change. Cooperation and mutuality, compassion, sharing, and caring. These are all things we talked about as solidarity paradigm values. They are the kind of values we need to build into our economy, replacing capitalist values. So economic political democracy, freedom, diversity, and pluralism, sustainability and respect for our precious planet, and economic human rights and well-being for all. Everyone's needs need to be met. We have the technology and the resources and the knowledge to do that. It's only because our economy has been oriented towards generating wealth for the top 1% and also reproducing these inequalities that are always already dividing us and dividing us, that we haven't been able to take the amazing abundance on the planet and the amazing technological knowledge we have and use it to create well-being for everyone. And that includes healthy, mutually respectful relationships. And love. Those are the core to human health. Now, solidarity and economy theory presents the solidarity economy and how it fits in capitalism like an iceberg. So you think, I've never seen a solidarity economy institution. They're nowhere, there aren't any. But they're the bottom of the iceberg. On the top of the iceberg is the selfish consumers, the selfish workers, the profit-motivated firms. That's what we read about in economics. That's what we hear about in the press. That's what we are told is economics. But underneath the waterline is a huge amount of institutions and practices that are solidaristic, like worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, businesses that care about the planet and people, unpaid care work that people are doing out of love and with great values and transforming the world. So that's one way of thinking of the solidarity economy. This is a diagram that Ethan Miller created, and it looks at solidarity economy practices and institutions in all the different sectors. I think you can easily read it now on the screen. And I will make this PowerPoint available for you after the talk. It'll be on our website, so you can get this information. So this is a great way to look at it. And there's examples everywhere. And one of the things that's happening, going back to when I said crises are creating solidarity economy, we had a panel yesterday about growing the solidarity economy in the context of COVID and Black Lives Matter. We had wonderful panelists, and they were talking about how the crisis, these dual issues, are causing a huge outgrowth of mutual aid associations, mutual aid networks all over the US and probably all over the world. They're also causing groups to really focusing on community gardens, focusing on actually creating PPE, masks, and things that aren't available. So people are coming together in the crisis to try to fill their needs. And the mutual aid networks are at the beginning, possibly a very big new wave of cooperation. Okay, so some examples: creating solidarity economy and consumption. For the values, you're achieving well-being for yourself and your family while you're supporting the well-being of others. The practices, sharing and mutual aid, socially responsible consumption. You think about who made it. You think about if it depleted the environment. You think of what happens after you use it. You minimize your footprint. You recycle. And then if you're in the government, economic human rights, that's very much being talked about today. We should have the right to jobs. We should have the right to food. We should have the right to housing. We shouldn't be evicted. these issues are coming up in response to COVID, and we can take the advantage of them and really push them. Collective consumption. We buy things together, we consume them together, we share them. Progressive taxes that redistribute wealth and income, like Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, that you can go further and further with that. And the idea of reparations for people who've been historically oppressed, like African Americans who were enslaved and have never gotten reparations. In work and production, you use your gifts and time to support yourself, you're trying to get a livelihood, and you're trying to help others. So you think of those two things. You care about yourself and you care about the whole. Practices, you could be in cooperative, a green business, social entrepreneurship. Parenting with solidarity economy values is very important kind of production. Standing in and whistleblowing, if you're working and doing something bad in a corporation, get the information out. We're not transparent. Terrible things are being done and we're not hearing about them. And the government, full employment policy, we've got the Green New Deal now in the US being pushed. So there's many ways, regulation of firms. We can revise the corporate charter. We can redefine corporations. You don't have to accept the old view that they need to be profit motivated and maximize shareholder value. We can have paid parental leaves like European countries have, shorter work weeks. So you can see already how this is already happening. These are already starting to happen. The US is behind in many of them. We can look ahead to Europe and other countries who are further ahead. But it's happening. So we need to know that's happening. That's what we want. Okay, now revolution. This is a way of looking at the change. It's revolutionary, it's systemic. So it's revolution, but it's evolution too, because it's going to take time. We have to change everything. We have to change our own identities. We have to change our beliefs. We have to change our practices, our institutions, and our relationships. So it's a huge challenge, but we've been doing it very actively for the last 50 years, and we can continue to do it. And we have so much knowledge, and we have so much information available, so much leadership that we have to do it. Well, we can do it, and we kind of need to do it. So we have an imperative right now to make this transformation, and we have the resources and ability to do it if we come together. So just wanted to, I love Gandhi's quote, be the change you want to see in the world. You can do things. There's not just one thing to do. We're talking about a paradigm shift. So anything you do, whether it's how you consume, how you work, how you relate to your child, how you relate to your parent, how you relate to your neighbor, how you relate to the person in the store, everything you do, how you relate to your political officials, what groups you're in, everything you do can be done with a lens to transforming from inequality to solidarity. So with that, I am going to open up for questions. So let me see if I can do that without too much ado. Unmute all. I think, I'll try unmuting all and see if we get bombed again. I'm so excited I got rid of the bomber. So let's see, I'm gonna look in the chat. Let me see if there's any questions. Oh, we can keep stack. Okay. Is Allison here? No. Okay. We're on the same page. What about unions? Unions are very important. That's a question from Dale, who has worked with unions. Unions are an anti-classist organizing structure, and they're getting more and more integrating gender and race, right, Dale? And they can be more conservative or more radical. I mean, they've taken a whole range. Sometimes they're pretty much just accept the capitalist rules. Unfortunately, a lot of unions have accepted the system. Early on in the union movement, there were a lot of co-ops. There was a lot of workers saying, we don't want to go work in, in this authoritarian workplace. But they're very, very important. Workers need to be organized. And it's the values, I think, that the unions have that are important. And also the social policies, because the unions cannot, we need economic human rights. We need a jobs policy. Unions can't really do that. They can't create that. What would you like to say, Dale?
Well, I would just like to say that I think you're underestimating that. and that unions have been at the forefront of health and safety considerations, doing all that. And when you talk about solidarity,
Yeah.
that they really are the at the forefront of that, and able to bring people together. And I think that that when you know, that's what solidarity is about. That's what the unions are about. And I don't think that they should be omitted from the paradigm of solidarity.
Oh, I wasn't omitting them. They were in the anti-classist. They were, I mean,
I didn't hear it mentioned, that's all.
Okay, thank you for the correction. I certainly did not mean to omit them, so thank you for that. Let's see what else we have here. Anybody?
That was one of our roommates at Stanford, Dale.
Yes, that was my roommate, Dale, at Stanford.
Oh boy, I hope I'm not. Oh,
Amy, I can hear you.
Oh, whoops.
That's my sister, Amy. Yes. And Lauren is saying the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops has an entire program about cooperatives and unions. So that's a thing to check out. So yes, actually it's true. Unions are also taking a big step in trying to create worker co-ops as well. So, but I appreciate that. Okay. Oh, let's see. Yeah, someone pointed out about unions can be somewhat democratic, Catherine did, but they accept capitalism for the most part, and Trumka's recent statement about police unions is egregious. Yeah.
What did he say?
What did he say, Catherine? You went on mute?
Unmuted. He was adamant that the police unions stay within the AFL-CIO. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not saying that I disagree with that, because it's better to have in it than hate us or whatever. But there should be some more education going on. I've worked for unions and been working with unions for over 40 years now, and something's coming back.
Don't worry, we can still hear you.
Okay. And I've been working, and most of the time, you know, I've been on bargaining, negotiating tables and whatever. And many times people just say, that's management's rights, or those are management's rights, or, you know, when you try to get into any kind of cooperative atmosphere. And there are even in the UE, for example, they are now coming around, they have been coming around to accept cooperatives, and that's great. But they missed the opportunity the first time when, do you remember the Republic Glass up in Chicago where they had the sit-down strike? And at first they found another capitalist to, you know, come in, and then they realized, now let's have a cooperative. So unions are a lot set in their ways, and there needs to be a discussion, more discussion with unions, that's all. And I think that they can be an engine of change. I'm not dissing them at all.
And I think that's true of almost every group that.
You're off.
Oh, I'm off. I am
Julie,
off.
you're off. I can't hear you.
That's interesting. I got muted.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. I said, I think that's true with almost every group that we're engaged in. There's probably not one that's perfect, but unions have a history. You need to know the historical pressures. And there's a lot of pressure to sell out, what we used to call sell out, you know, to get what you want, to get the funding, to use that divide and conquer has worked with us, rather than us trying to always support what we've done, not trash it, but also try to do better. Be understanding. We used to have the thing in the 60s, Dale, and you guys will remember the whole politically correct. And gosh, to be politically correct was like this thing, and no one could totally do it. And we all felt really bad because we couldn't do it. But my point is always, yes, I've been in this struggle over the years, is do your best. Admit you're going to make mistakes. Apologize, and then get doing your best. Do the best you can. We have grown up in this terrible inequality paradigm. All that stuff is in us. We've learned it. We're surrounded by it. It's not easy to get out of it. We need to support each other and love each other and help each other and notice the good. That's one of the things I've really, really realized. Notice the good that's happening and try to copy it and adjust it to your situation. And there are wonderful things happening around the world. And I was just seeing David Barkin writing in the
Okay, I need it. Damon, do you have any headphones, Dr. Brown?
I can hear that, whoever that is, with asking for headphones. David Barkin from Mexico, he's done all this work down there with growing the solidarity economy. And he calls it humanitarian revolutionary groups that he's been working with. And we have studied in the US in our movement, we're studying things all around the world that are happening. And we are behind in this country. But we have really good social movement history and activity. I think a lot of the world has been learning from our social movements. We can be very proud of them. And
Yes.
Black Lives Matter is one of the many ones that we've brought to the world as a huge contribution out of our oppressive system. Yes, Marlon.
No, I just agree. It's important.
Yeah.
To affirm the things that are happening. It's a very hopeful time.
We have to see that, because if we get down, if we let the bad stuff get us down, if we just get depressed and we don't do anything, they've won. If we believe that there's no alternative and we know how terrible things are, they've won. Even if we know how bad things are. And when I first started teaching, I did the Marxist thing of criticizing the whole economy and racist capitalist patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I had a perfect critique, and my students, they walked out of my classes very aware of all the problems, but they literally were just powerless. They felt depressed.
Yes.
I didn't empower them to do anything.
Yeah.
And I realized I had to shift. I had to find the good things happening. Luckily, there were a lot of other people doing it, and I could find their research and find all the things they were finding. And a lot of them are old things that have been around forever. A lot of the solidarity economy stuff, existed in indigenous economies and still exists in indigenous economies. So they have their whole, they say, I was at a conference, they said, we don't need your solidarity economy. We already have a word for that in our language. We've had that. You guys took it away, So we look everywhere for these institutions. And Jessica Gordon-Nemhart looks in the African-American history and looks way back to, Fannie Lou Hamer and people starting cooperatives and rotating credit associations. Way back, 19th century stuff. So there's a history of this stuff, partly to just rediscover that bottom of the iceberg. Let's see, other questions. Corruption of union, we're going back. Okay, intergenerational work. Pia, well, isn't that totally important? And what I've seen is the youth have so much energy and a fresh view, and they can really see what a lot of us take for granted as they come into the world. And the elders, especially us 60s activist types, we have a lot of experience and knowledge. We might not have a lot of technical knowledge, and we might have some issues that we need to, like the whole non-binary thing. A lot of people are trying to, wrap their heads around that. But there is a lot of potential for learning across generations. And I think the neat thing about these movements, a lot of them, they are intergenerational. The World Social Forum, everyone I've been to, has a lot of people my age and a lot of much younger people. Kind of a gap in the middle. But I think that's very, very important. Okay, good. We have it. Oh, good. Allison's been here the whole time. No, that's good, Allison. What else? Let's see, the iceberg graphic. Oh, Mike, your Testify has feedback. Your Testify, can you either mute Testify? I'm looking at you. Someone's saying that your mic has feedback. Could you mute it? Testify. It'd be at the bottom on the left. Okay, good, he muted. Thank you. Okay, anyone want to raise their hand in an old-fashioned way? Because I think we're down to a screen now. Yes, Lauren. Unmute yourself, please. You're still muted. You just have to do that unmute button up in the right-hand corner. I don't know why. Oh, are you not able to unmute? Shoot. Let me see. Maybe I haven't let you unmute because that bomber. Since the bomber, unmute all. Oh, sorry. No one's been able to unmute all this time. No wonder you haven't been asking questions. Wouldn't that be something in the classroom if I could just tell my students, mute? Then they were like, none could talk. I mean, we've never had that power before. It's terrifying. Okay,
Ooh,
Laura.
okay, I'm here. Hi.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. So I guess I have more of an existential question about solidarity economy organizing. And if we accept that it's a movement of movements, I'm wondering how effective at least from, let's say, like the last social forum, how effective it's been as a banner to marshal more people under. Especially now with the uprisings, we're seeing so many people become newly energized under the auspices of abolitionism, which necessarily requires a solidarity economy. So the framework is not how do we end police and end prisons, but end the conditions that create those institutions, right? I think there's so much that we include under our banners and they're held by values, but those values are very difficult to regulate. And we end up getting a lot of centrist and even right of center solidarity economy things, or at least entities that don't adhere to every value all of the time, right? And will prioritize worker ownership, but are still incredibly racist, or many examples. So I guess I'm wondering, a two-part, how do we regulate the space more effectively, especially with our national and international membership networks like SEN and like REPES? And then also how can we kind of effectively marshal a framework and capitalize on the moment that we're seeing and use that energy?
Wow, Liv, those questions, those are really good questions. That was, I mean, I don't mean to cop out here, but marshaling the movement thing is really tough. I think we have to, because I've been in so many groups and there'll be one or two people even that are so bad and we haven't had good processes to figure out what to do with them. I think around the values question, generally, if you keep talking, you end up with a solidarity economy. You end up, if you're going to liberate all Black people, you have to deal with class. You have to deal with capitalism, like you're saying. How do you deal with the prison industrial complex without a system change? So you keep it's education. When we bring people along, we've been taught that system change is terribly scary at my generation, not you guys. I don't know what you were taught actually, but because you're much more open to socialism. You know, we were taught, my generation, you know, Cold War, it's bad and terrible, you're in a concentration camp. So we had to unlearn that. But I still think even your generation has not really been taught that there's another possible system there. So we have to educate around that. And that needs to be done in every movement. When everyone's not going to turn into the World Social Forum movement. I mean, that's just a way for movements to come together and have a space where they can connect. And for us to start realizing that we're citizens of the world, that there's something we have in common in spite of all the differences. And the common thing is our values. We have to get beyond identity politics. They're totally important. We have to organize as women. We have to organize as people of color. We have to organize as workers. That's part of the struggle, but we have to also transcend that. It's a both and. We have to be people. We have to realize we're citizens of the world that love each other. We're against all inequality. And we make that argument in our institutions. Even if, and I remember talking to Jessica Gordon-Nemhart about this, there's going to be a reason to sometimes have institutions that are all women or all people of color or all workers. But like you said, in that group, you can have some really conservative people. You can have some feminists who are homophobic, that are very classist. I've experienced that in feminism. What do you do with them? You have to argue, you have to pull feminism along. And that's what we did in my Marxist feminist group. Some of them are here right now. We pulled ourselves along. We were ignoring race. Well, that wasn't really good. You know what I mean? And our sisters of color were the ones who did pull us into that, and the anti-colonial, the third world women in our group. They're like, duh, colonization, duh, Israel and Palestine, but we had to learn that. So that's a learning, but other people have done it, and there are stuff available. In the session we had yesterday, there was a lot of focus on education and learning, and how when we learn together, we create a common understanding that we can move with. And the problem is we are being continually programmed by programs. They literally call them programs. If you think of the computer parallel, our kids are being programmed, we are being programmed, and it's a struggle to use the social media and the internet, all that we have, like Zoom, to reprogram ourselves, to liberate ourselves, to create solidarity, economy, awareness, rather than being programmed back into the inequality paradigm and capitalism. So those are so important. And your second question, your first was, how can the organizations intervene? I don't think they can. But we can just keep talking. And when we have meetings at the World Social Forum, we can have meetings that talk about different issues. And whoever goes there, but everyone can't, are going to talk together and create that. Because the global thing is huge too. Global inequality is huge. Global power relations, war. So we need to get together globally, and we need to organize locally at the same time. So we call it globalizing. Okay, what else here? Anyone, how about just, I think I do have a couple screens, so I can't see everyone's hand, but does someone want to raise a hand? Oh, there we have MJ Page Lieberman, is it? Do you want to raise your hand? Do you want to talk? I see it says raised hand, and I see Hendricks has a question. Okay, well, let's go with Hendricks since MJ is not responding. Hendricks.
So I'm wondering about what your thoughts are about the kind of the interaction between the pluralism value and the need to build concrete infrastructure to tie together these different, examples of solidarity economy. I think one of the reasons why, people feel like there's no alternatives is obviously this issue of examples, but like we point to these examples and we're like, see, look, you can do worker co-ops. But like, for me, that's a way of behaving, but that's not an economy. Like an economy, like all of those things put together. Yeah. And I really love the value of pluralism that solidarity economy holds up. And I think it's really important to hold up this vision for a world, a pluriversal world. But I wonder if that's at all if you see that at all in contradiction with building infrastructure that combines these initiatives, that weaves together these initiatives, creates economic incentives to advance solidarity economy values. Like what do we replace? Like, what do we replace the stock exchange with? What do we replace business schools with? What do we replace private property laws? Like all this economic infrastructure to build a solidarity economy instead of enforcing capitalist economy.
And there actually are ideas in all those different sectors. I think the solidarity economy movement in the US tends to focus on co-ops, community land trusts, things that are really kind of obvious institutions that embody these and aren't capitalist, but there's experiments with different kind of stock exchange in Canada I know about. What was your other thing, stock exchange? Businesses. There's
like MBA programs.
Yeah, MBA programs. There's MBA programs that are progressive. They used to have a program called Beyond, I think it's called Beyond Gray Pinstripes, and all about, even I have a friend, Janice, are you here on the call, who works at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and their business school is a radical business school. Cool. It's all about, it's even called transformation program or organizational transformation program. So I like to collect all of them in all the sectors, and I don't know how, as we grow our movement, it's great to let people know, because then it means you can do everything in your life. You can consume from businesses that are like this. You can try to find a job. I tell my students, trying to find a job with an employer who has these values, or you can be a whistleblower, go in and infiltrate and then report, or create something. There's a lot of opportunities, but I think it's different than the pluralism. One is the multi-sectoral aspect of an economy. It has to have many, many things. And those things, the more we can connect them up. I saw a great talk by a Latin American solidarity economy theorist. He said a worker co-op by itself is a worker co-op.
Yeah.
A worker co-op that knows it's part of transformation to a solidarity economy is a totally different thing. It has a different awareness. It's going to behave differently. It's going to connect to others differently. It's going to look for suppliers that have solidarity economy values. It's going to try to create a product that's going to be ecological. You know, it's going to start to, so that within a market, as the values change, it does, then they get embodied in the market, and then they become available, and then it's up to the people who are making the decisions in the market to use those values too. So you don't need to map everything out. It's not a planned economy. We're not proposing a fully planned solidarity economy. We're proposing what seems to be emerging, which is the kind of agency that people have in capitalism is changing to a solidarity kind of economy agency. Solidaristic, you're caring about others and yourself. You're caring about the environment. You're caring about the workers that produce it. You're trying to minimize your consumption. You're trying to minimize your footprint. You're trying to work in the workplace in a way that's not racist and sexist. So that is one thing, Hendricks. The other thing is pluralism of models. Like maybe in Latin America, they call it buen vivir, and they're going about it a very different way. Or maybe they, there are different kinds of institutions. In India, they have a totally different institutions emerging that are very solidaristic, and I hate to say it, I cannot name them, but I know that they have a different way of organizing there that I've noticed. A lot of it's based on Gandhi, and it's communitarian, and it's just like David was calling it, revolutionary communitarianism. So that's the thing where we think it's very, very important not to try to be homogeneous, partly because all the different cultures in the world, people's cultures are going to affect how they create the solidarity economy. People's histories are going to affect how they create it. So even within Massachusetts, we may have it different, but you're going to have huge differences between countries. And you also might have differences culturally, like between the way the African American community now is going to create things, like they were talking yesterday at our panel. What are they going to do? What new things are they going to come up with that they're going to bring to the solidarity economy movement that are going to come from them? And maybe they're going to be different in another group of immigrant cooperatives or whatever. So I think the diversity is huge. It's very important because otherwise the old leftist model was you envision a future and then everyone has to do it. And we really learned that wasn't a good idea. And the founders of the World Social Forum, I heard one of them speaking at an early World Social Forum, and he said, that's why we created the World Social Forum. There's no one right answer. We're against all forms of oppression, but we do not have one line. And because that was what the leftists used to do. It's like how many angels can fit on the top of a pin? What is exactly the right way to do production? Is it a worker co-op? Is it social enterprise? I argue with Emily Kawano all the time. I think we should include social enterprises. Maybe they're capitalist too. They still have a social goal. A worker co-op could be racist and sexist. So, of course we want everything. We want a worker co-op. We want to have the good values in production, but we're not all there yet. So there's a lot of different experience. So I don't know if I answered your question, but try to some. Okay, Bill, do you want to unmute yourself? And then I'll check the other page.
Well, Julie, this is wonderful. I agree with just about everything you're saying, and I think the framework you've created is terrific. I wonder, what I want to introduce is the topic of networking and information sharing, that somehow we have to create a synergy which hasn't been there before. And you in what you just said, you raise a tricky dynamic in terms of allowing, and we want to be inclusive, absolutely, but at some point there needs to be some curating, particularly with respect to information. So, and we have the capability in terms of the computer networking, information sharing, but still the process of how to make that work in a way that is synergistic and not all-inclusive to the point where things are dissolved and made too disparate. So I could set it up more, but if you get the sense of where I'm heading, I'd love your comments.
I do. I mean, information is key. So important. And we have to figure that out. And did you know the May 1st Collective?
I don't.
They are, I think they're a cooperative. They're working on IT stuff from a solidarity economy perspective. They're in the US, and you might want to check them out. One of the things they're looking at is platforms, and platforms that aren't going to be spied on, or we're all getting reported all the time. Zoom, I guess, is trying to do a little better, but you know, these platforms, we're literally totally, our information is totally available to powers that be. And that actually is more of a problem than many of us think. So that, besides your point about how do we control information flow? For example, I don't know how many of you were here at the beginning of the call, but when it got bombed by that person, it was playing Nazi and KKK songs.
Yeah.
It was like, that was an example. And thank God someone had told me about how to remove a person, because I practiced that. I thought, well, just in case, you know, I'm not going to make it that.
Okay.
They probably aren't thinking of me, but in case they are, because this is the World Social Forum on Transformative Economics, that's kind of an important topic in the world. It's kind of a thing that the powers that be wouldn't really necessarily want to have happen. So they might actually be trying to do something. And sure enough, we got a bomber, and luckily we got the technology. But that was an example, Bill, of what you ought to be able to take stuff down. If there's really bad stuff that's put on your information system, you have to be able to have people monitoring it and taking it down. You cannot allow that stuff. And we've seen that on the internet all the time, and comments that are terrible, and they just can ruin a discussion. And there are strategies. There's a lot of energy going to keep our movement from happening. A lot of it is subtle. We don't know it. There's a lot of paid people who are not informants. They're paid to subvert our groups. And this has been happening since the 60s. And those of you in Columbia remember Craig Schindler was doing a book on it. They were subverting us in the 60s, and they would come and they'd say, let's go bomb this railroad track. Right. And they would have the bombs, and they would try to get everyone to go, and then everyone would get arrested. And they were paid agents, and there's lots of them, and we don't even know. We'll probably never know how many there are. But occasionally, you know, you hear about one or two, but we need to know that. So we need to be ready, Bill. When someone's way off, it's one thing if they're ready to have a discussion. It's another thing if, you know, but you don't really know. So I think life is hard. Organizing is hard. We'll do our best, but information's key, and we need people who know about IT and know about information to be in our movement. So find a group that's working on that. And also there's Agaric, A-G-A-R-I-C, Mickey Metz. That's a co-op that does IT work, and they're wonderful. You could contact her. She would have a lot of ideas. And one of the exciting things in IT around the solidarity economy is platform cooperativism. All these platforms like Uber that we thought were going to be great, and Airbnb, and then they ended up getting used, especially Uber. Workers are earning less and less, and profits are being extracted. You can make cooperatives out of platforms. Very easy. And there's a whole movement now. So that's another thing to look into. Let me see if there's any hands on the other screen. Oh, yes, Church.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
So I was glad to hear you mention that there was a place for market mechanisms, and I can think of at least an example to discuss where that's promoted the social good, in the cap and trade system for sulfur dioxide, 30 years ago. That was very effective in solving that problem. Are there other examples that you can think of where market pricing is helped promote the values and goals of the solidarity economy?
Well, good question. And I'm talking even beyond like a market. The cap and trade is a public policy that capped the amount of emissions, and then the companies would trade them and put a price on pollution, basically, which makes it so firms try to minimize it. But what I'm talking about, like keeping the market, I'm talking about keeping a market economy, period. In other words, people get paid money, they go and purchase goods. There are enterprises that could be ideally would be owned by the workers or owned by the communities that are producing goods, so that money continues to exist as a means of exchange. Now, I'm not going to say that's the only thing we're doing. In fact, I listened to the inaugural session on Thursday, which was totally awesome. And they were talking about Bitcoin, they were talking about community currencies, time trades. There's a lot of other ways that exchange can happen. And what's happening now, because capitalism is not providing people with enough money to live, people are starting to do these time trades and these mutual aids. They're starting to share, and they did that in Argentina when everything broke down in the crisis. They started having swaps and people coming together. So other forms of exchange can happen when money fails. But the main point is that I was making that perhaps wasn't clear because I'm coming from this history of economics and socialism. It's the old idea of socialism was plan everything. The government says, we create the government decides this is what firms are going to produce, this are going to be their inputs, this is how many people they're going to hire, this is how many people are going to study this. So they plan everything, and there's no market pricing mechanism where people can choose what to buy and firms can choose what to produce and all that. So all I'm saying is that we are thinking, at least now, we're building the solidarity economy and we're not getting rid of the market. We might supplement it. We're not against getting rid of it and using a time trade or using mutual aid or whatever, but that the market itself isn't a problem. Now, what you would say, for example, for the pollution, even mainstream economists said when I studied in graduate school, it's inefficient in capitalism around the environment because firms don't have to pay for it. You need to put a price on that pollution or forbid it. So you have to intervene in markets. I'm not saying you don't. And the solidarity economy view, we have a disagreement. Some people say get rid of the state and everyone just get local. But most people say the state's going to be in there. There's going to be policies. And they're going to make sure everyone has food, everyone has housing, everyone has a job. They're going to make sure we create jobs when we don't have them. They're going to make sure everyone has education. They're not going to allow firms to get really, really huge and control the economy, world economy, like Amazon and Walmart. It's ridiculous. I mean, these things are totally inefficient and very oppressive. So there will be a lot of intervention, but the idea is that the market itself doesn't need to be abolished.
Well,
Again,
that's I agree with that. And yeah. You may know Rebecca Henderson, who I admire. Her work, yes. It may be semantics or terminology, but she's saying, let's not get rid of capitalism. Let's get it to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right,
I mean,
or better.
That's a disagreement where I would say, don't call it capitalism, but there's people who say keep capitalism and change it, and we're really not different. So to me, I think it helps to name a different system, but I found people who have your perspective, who agree with all the values and everything, and then why not call it a new kind of capitalism? It's really, whatever. I think we want to say, though, it's a systemic change. And the thing about capitalism, that talks about the role of having production organized around filling the needs of the owners. That is what capitalism does. Capital, the owners of capital, are the ones whose needs dictate. If you change that and firms don't do that anymore, and you still want to call that capitalism, call it worker capitalism or people's capitalism, I mean, you could find a word. I don't think green goes far enough, but I think you could find words. So let me see if there's any other questions. Right. But thank you for yours.
Thank you.
Let me see. And Allison, are there any that you've seen on the chat?
Yes.
Okay, good. I mean, anyone can obviously get off, but I'm just going to stay on as long as there's questions. So can you tell me, Catherine? I mean, Allison, what am I doing? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Allison.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Morgan is raising her hand, and there are also a couple of questions in the chat. So Morgan, these were placed, but if you want to go, if you want to go ahead, but maybe we can read over. We can all take time to read. We have questions about the military, but I'd encourage anybody who's typed in a question who'd like Julie to answer it to raise your hands. And maybe Morgan, you can take that. Okay.
Morgan can do what? So Morgan start? And
Yes.
then other people raise their hands if they want a question. That'd be good, because it's hard to read. There's so much writing there. Yes, Morgan. My dear sister Morgan.
I'm more new to this. You all have years and years of education and knowledge, but it's a, does it exist out there with our internet and communication? You talk about different things that a person can do, and one can be who I choose to buy my shoes from, or my clothes, or my groceries, or whatever. Is there a network of, I always imagine, you know, that someone could, a company could have a listing that they're fair to their, all the things you mentioned. It's not just that they're anti-racial, but, you know, but are they fair to the environment, to their workers, to the, you know, fields, or whatever? Is there a way, or does it exist anywhere that I could go to a source and people, and it could be more known that, well, this company does X, Y, or maybe I'm imagining, you know, they're checked for 5 of the 10, you know, values or qualities, but it's still better than none of them. But someone who trashes, a company that trashes the environment and their workers and the, you know what I mean? Is there a resource out there of, so if people wanted to buy more consciously, a source they could find things? Thanks.
Well, this has been that's a very good question, and it's been something we've been working on a lot in the movement, and going way back, and this is like Alice Tepper Marlin at Wellesley, who's like 40 years older than me. She started a Buying for a Better World, and it was a book, and she looked at the different companies you could buy from, and she put it in a book. And then if you look at the Brazilians, they're way ahead of us in the solidarity economy. Excuse me. Before their terrible Bolsonaro, they had very progressive governments, and they had ministries of the solidarity economy, and they created a mapping thing. And Hendricks, I don't know if you're still here, but Hendricks is working on one for the US. Other people are. The idea is you put in the firms, put the solidarity economy firms in the map, and ideally it would be totally peopled. And when you want to buy something, you go to the map, you look at the industry. In Brazil, they had the industry, what they produced, and you could figure out who you could buy from if you were a firm that would be socially responsible and solidaristic. If you were a consumer, you could use it. I mean, the sky is the limit what we could do. I've heard people talk about how you could take that, you know, that bar that you read on a good, you could put it in your phone, you can make an app, and it could show you the rating, just like Morgan said. Rate that company on all those different things. You know, if we had a government that took our money and used it to do stuff like that, rather than make war and create police state and prisons and things like that, and, you know, subsidize rich people, that would be something we'd want to do, right? Totally. We'd want everyone to have that information. Money should not be the only aspect of buying something, just buying the cheapest thing. We should also know if the product is good, if it lasts, if it's safe. We have vaccines out there that have never even been tested. You know, so we've got a problem around consumer. We have no consumer power in this country, even though we think we do. So people are working on it, Morgan, but we don't have a lot of funding. The more people do work on it, and the platforms Bill's talking about, all the information, we have a possibility of putting that out. And that's what we need to do if we're going to do it without planning and without just regulating. You know, you can regulate everything, but you also, that's from the top down. You also want people to use their values to impact what gets done, who they buy from. So you want to penalize the ones that aren't doing that well. You want to buy from the ones that are doing well. That's an incentive then for all the firms to say, oh, geez, you know, I should think about the diversity of my staff or how I affected the environment. So good question to live. Another question to live. Let's see. Allison, what do you think we should do now?
Well, Lauren has her hands up again. I bet she has a good question.
Okay, let's go with Lauren.
So, hi again. kind of related to that last question, but also something you had said earlier, Julie, was I'm wondering about your impression of where a lot of the energy and focus in US solidarity economy discourse is in terms of, I'm wondering if, I'm trying to ask this in a way that's not leading, but a lot
That's
of,
not what?
that's not a leading question.
Okay.
A lot of, let's say, like new people that are exposed to the solidarity economy framework will often ask, like, where is a thing I can purchase? They're asking at the consumption and distribution end.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if that is something that is particular to the US in any way, because so many of the other more pluralist examples we see are social and solidarity economies that we see in other regions have an emphasis on not only cooperative consumption and distribution, but production. And I'm wondering if you see any kind of energy developing in that same way in the US, because where I am in New York, a lot of it is about creating cooperatives, creating land trusts, like you say, and those cooperatives are like housing, financial, worker, and other, but not a lot about the production and manufacturing ends of it. And obviously New York is not the US. So I'm wondering if, like, what is the higher level kind of discourse around where we should funnel our solidarity economy energies and collectivizing energies into in like the span of an economy.
Yeah. See, it's almost like we could use Ethan's wheel.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important to try to, even just the mapping and like what Hendrix is talking about, we have just the basic mapping, like what do we have in the different sectors?
Your video shows you walking around your room, you bent over the bed, they can almost see your butt.
Whose video? Maybe you should.
Well, then just face
you're getting
phone down,
again.
face down.
Are you talking about me?
Or put a towel over it. Again. Something.
My video right now?
Okay.
No, Julie, you're fine.
Oh, okay.
There's another person walking around.
Okay, let me see. Who is that? Can you see who it is?
I don't know who it is.
It's a gun bombing again.
She's not being bombed. You're not being bombed. She just.
Okay, I can turn off her.
Know that she was on camera.
Oh, okay. Thanks for telling her.
Okay.
That's what happens on this Zoom thing, you know, you don't know someone's watching.
Just didn't realize she was on camera and she was leaning over. I mean, that's why I'm blocked out, because I'm not dressed.
Okay, good. So let me answer Lauren's question, try to. I think that's a huge question. And I think one of the things, the reason I speak about the solidarity economy and write about it is I think people need to know about it, the framework. More people need to get involved. More people need to think about these questions. And we need to get more funding for it. And we need to connect around the world to other countries that are more advanced and see what they're doing. But you're absolutely right, Lauren. We don't want to get stuck on just one set of institutions. And we have to talk about, to me, talking about how everyone can be involved every day in what they do. And Morgan's question is like, what can we tell people to do? Like, for example, I'm about to write a paper about, 7 ways to be a white anti-racist. All the white people now, they're wondering, what can I do? What can I do? They care, they want to do something. Well, we need to give them stuff to do. We need to, if I want to help build this solidarity economy, how can I do it? What can I do? And then for the groups, we get together, we use the mapping partly to understand what the needs are, but also it's going to be what are the areas where we have the potential for growing. But we don't want to get stuck in one thing. I don't think we should just be like totally idealizing worker co-ops and not doing anything else. So it's a great question. And these are, it's all work that needs to be done. So I encourage you to, we're starting to get local networks in cities. That really seems to be working the best, because cities, they're small, people see each other, they're on the ground, they can do mutual aid, they can do community gardens, they can deal with local politics. And local politics are a lot easier to control in the US than like Donald Trump. So local politics is an area. Sorry, someone needs to mute. I don't know. I'm going to mute everybody. I'm just going to mute. When I talked to him, I said plug it in. I'm going to mute all, and then, but it's not working. Huh. And now, okay, here we go. So a lot of the good organizing now in the US is local. You're talking about New York, they have a really good group there, scenic, but they are affecting local policy. They're getting money to fund worker co-ops. You can create, the city of New York also created a time trade in a neighborhood. A time trade is like an alternative currency, so people can trade their time. The city thought, wow, people don't have their needs met. We're going to create that. So local is really a great way to organize and then connect to other localities and also come together around national policy. SEN right now is, we're writing candidates. We made a candidate letter. If any of you are involved in political campaigns, you can contact me, because we have a candidate letter where we providing to people to send out and ask candidates their stance on solidarity economy issues. So it's just a simple letter, and it's just to get it into the policy discourse. Just like the Green New Deal, I mean, that was in nowhere, and they did a lot of work, the Sunrise Movement, and they got that Green New Deal on the map. And Bernie Sanders has gotten a lot of progressive policies that, in my view, again, they're moving us toward the solidarity economy. He's not talking about, you know, changing the corporate charter, but he's really talking about moving us towards solidarity. So moving, however, whatever we can do, and then the envisioning, and then I like the multi-sectoral point, Lauren, to try to get more balance in the movement and not get fetishizing into a certain thing. Okay, Allison, what should we do now? I don't hear you.
Hi.
No. Hi. Are we good?
Yeah, yeah. There've been a few questions that are asking some of these things. I think that we're aligned with our questions, really. And so I'd like to pose another question that I feel like is partly mine. It's partly what's been reflected with Lawrence Hendricks earlier and some of the comments that I'm seeing, which is to align the values underneath this umbrella. And so what I'm hearing too are piecemeal strategies with some of these things, like if the solidarity economy has values as its root, can we start talking towards what those values are and as checks and balances on whether or not our economy is headed in the right direction, right? So for instance, I know that we talked about Hazel Henderson, and she has a great, very unbundled, complex, you know, indicators of how the system goes. I mean, I'm looking at well-being, for instance, as an economics teacher. I know that I'm successful in my classroom when my students can meet well-being. This is evidence-based practice, right? So much of what we have is not evidence-based at all. It's reactionary. And so if we, you know, when we can understand what our collective values are, then we can check one another and have a little bit more trust, checking in if we're meeting those values or not, and if not, re-strategize in multiple ways. So for instance, we know for students that an emotional well-being increases your capacity to learn and to be human in the world. And in fact, that is actually what we're trying to achieve with school, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet, even though we know that, we do not have emotional well-being as measurements or indicators or priorities in school. We stick with a GPA in the same way we stick with a GDP. That doesn't actually measure what we're doing. And so for me, you know, just really tangible and continuing to hone in, visioning what the world is that we want and speaking to that and designing our systems towards that. And I think that would be an overarching umbrella that can unify a solidarity movement, start to build trust between us so that we can collaborate better. And I guess that's what I propose, you know, is how to do that from here on forward. And I'm excited about the potential for that. I really am. And just want to say one other thing too, is the importance of money in all of this, that we are kind of, the lack of depth of talking and acknowledging that we are all using a monetary debt-based monoculture. And as long as we're using that, we're enslaved to it. As long as that is the singular source of us achieving our potential and meeting our basic needs, we're enslaved to that together.
Interesting.
I think.
Well, I think your point really good points, and I feel like you made them. But so the idea, one of your ideas that I got from what you said was, we have our value system, and from the value system we create indicators to use to judge institutions, output, different, you know, how the students are doing, we create different indicators. And that is really important, and important to just bring that into this discussion, because that whole thing, like the critique of GDP, gross domestic product's been going on for a long time. And it's ridiculous to measure the well-being of a country by the output. It could be, you know, as Marilyn Waring said, the Exxon Valdez crashed. It cost all this money to fix it, and the GDP went up. You know, it could be pollution remedy. It could be a war. The GDP went up. So to get those indicators, because those are the things that are telling us the signposts. And when I tried to do those graphs for the countries and how far they were along, it was hard to find indicators. You know, these are things we should know. If we really had a government and information system that was serving us, we should know this. We should know how well we're doing. We should know how well other people are doing. We should know as consumers, as Morgan said, how well the people we're buying from are doing. If we have these values, and we do, and when you talk about these values, the thing is, most people agree with you. It's not that people say, oh no, you know, I'm really racist. People don't, there are those weird ones that bomb the class, but the conference, but generally there's quite large agreement on the values. So the indicators and how to get there and how to make a balance, how to you know, it's not easy. And I wanted to say, and I didn't get a chance to, the metaphor for the butterfly, because Emily Kawano and Jessica Gordon-Nemhart used that to talk about system change and how the caterpillar goes into the cocoon and it looks like it's dead. And then these cells, these imaginal cells start forming, and they don't kind of know what to do. And then they start going around, and at the beginning, the cocoon fights them, but they keep growing. And then they start becoming the head or the wing or the leg or whatever, or the eye. They start doing that, and they start linking together, and they create this new system that's a butterfly. And it happens all the time when these caterpillars turn into butterflies. So we're like the imaginal cells. We're like the ones, we need everyone to become imaginal cells, trying to figure out how to create this new thing that we don't have a blueprint. We build the road as we travel is one of the sayings that the cooperative movement came up with. We don't exactly know. We know our values. We know we're going to have diversity, but we're building the road as we travel, but we know the direction we're going. We know what we don't want. And the indicators are really important. And I love the thing about the GPA. Oh my goodness. Why should the GPA, and it's used against students, and classrooms are so authoritarian. One teacher can give a student a D and ruin their future. Ruin their future. And there's no recourse at a wonderful liberal place like Wellesley.
Meritocracy, Katie said. Yeah.
It's not just meritocracy, it is a dictatorship in the class. And if you don't agree with the professor, you can be punished severely, and students are. So I see Katie has the question. Should we go with that, Allison, or were there other ones? Oh yeah, Katie, she said the same one, okay. Should we ask Katie? Katie, do you want to unmute yourself? I can't see you. There you are.
I don't know if this question should be prioritized, but I do just continue to go back to the idea of money. That if we're saying that money limits us, then providing basic necessities to people so that they don't need money, like they're doing, someone mentioned they're doing that in New York. So that's a topic that I'm interested in. And then how cooperatives can really do that in frontline ways, particularly now with the coronavirus. The call yesterday spoke a lot to that in interesting ways.
Yeah, right. And the time trades are amazing, and you can use time trades. That's where you use a computer program and people get credit, because otherwise it's either gifting, where you're giving, which is wonderful, but everyone can't just gift, people need things. Bartering is, you have what I want, but I got to give you something I've got, you know, so it's limited. So the time trade or a community currency allows you to separate buying and selling. I can find who has what I want, and I can find who wants what I have. So the time trades do that using computer programs, and areas have worked, created, they used to be money, but now you really don't. It's kind of obsolete. You can do it without money. But it is very important. I don't know in the end, I can't predict whether or not our movement will really go, really move away from money. I kind of disagree with Allison. I don't think that money per se is oppressive, but the way it is organized now is, and it's all being concentrated in the hands of a few, and they have a lot of power. So how do we get that power away from them? I mean,
without engaging
billionaires.
in
It's something like, it's something, just let me say, you know, it's something like less than 10 people own more than half the people in the world in terms of wealth. I mean, it's unbelievable, the concentration. So if we ignore money and do this, we have a way to provision ourselves. But if their money can still buy them power and police and governments and everything, maybe we need to go after that money too. Maybe money, the monetary economy just can't be ignored, you know, because money is power, and that's the big problem with capitalism. The concentration of money in the hands of a few, and then those few use the money to control the economy and the state to keep their money and even get more money.
Exactly. So, and then how do we engage without engaging in that system?
I think, see, to me, that's why I think we can't just do alternative institutions. We can do those, we can use them to survive and everything, but we have to engage nationally in our government and change the laws. We could tax that. Elizabeth Warren was just asking, was it a part of 1% of wealth? And it was going to fund all daycare, all child, you know, pre-K. She was funding a huge number of things with a teeny percentage on tax on wealth. Well, we could make a much bigger tax. How many people in this country have a lot of wealth? Wouldn't you think most people would want to redistribute the wealth? Probably, unless they've been totally, you know, brainwashed that somehow that's going to hurt them because these wealthy people are doing such great things for them. But you know what I mean? I don't think we should give up participating in that larger economy and trying to transform it. But it maybe is like a walking on two legs kind of thing, like Mao did at one point, where you build the alternative institutions to survive, and you're also intervening. And everyone doesn't have to do the same thing. There's movements, wonderful watchdog movements that are working with the government, working on, you know, the whole thing about even voting. Are we going to be able to vote in the fall? Are we going to have a post office? I mean, it's everywhere. Groups are doing all different kinds of organizing, but I don't think we can just do our local alternative institutions. Personally, I'm not saying people shouldn't go do it. I'm just saying I would not discourage organizing that deals with the larger monetary system and trying to get control back over it, make it work for people. The Fed has to be democratized. The Fed is not democratic. They control the money supply. It's a private institution.
There you go.
For example.
Thank you. And Mark has been in as a question, and so I'll let you take that.
Okay. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for this conversation. I was curious, I guess, we've already talked about this a lot, about responses, solidarity economy responses to the current situation. And I guess it was Lauren who had to jump off the call, was talking about production. And I guess that happens to be where my head goes often, because so much of the controversy, if it is that in the, I guess, sort of mainstream American political discourses of whether to shut down or not to shut down, and there's been these sort of battles over this along these interesting lines that may in some ways be peculiar to America. So what are the sort of anti-lockdown protests, and you know, and one of the I guess we're all implicitly saying this, but just to say it a little more explicitly, one opportunity from a solidarity economy perspective is to say that we don't have to look at it in this binary fashion, that it isn't just a question of here's this object known as an economy, and we either turn it on or turn off, right? Because if it's off, then your livelihood is gone, right? So of course there's good reason to be concerned about turning this object off that's the source of your livelihood. Personally, I wasn't necessarily objecting to some of the shutdown protesters. I mean, I know there's AstroTurf, et cetera, but there are, you know, if we have such a lousy economic policy response, as America did, to the shutdowns, then there might be good reason to be concerned about the shutdowns. So I guess I guess when you look at solidarity economy practices, including, in my view, worker co-ops or anything that's more democratized, then you could, for example, meet people's needs better if the people are the one in charge. Now, that, of course, is very general, but if you think, for example, about the question of worker safety in a workplace, so rather than having sort of poultry producers have the owner sort of not only grind up the meat, but grind up the workers, in effect, because the workers have no choice, because, you know, in effect, they're choosing between their lives or their livelihood. If you could imagine production practices in which the workers are themselves governing and they make their own decisions as to what sort of risks are tolerable and what sorts are not. You know, and I don't think that solidarity economy practices, whether worker co-op or otherwise, have like a total answer to this, because, and this is something I'm just wondering about. I mean, the pandemic places certain types of objective constraints on the way production is organized, if we take things like social distancing seriously, et cetera. But at the same time, the way the economy is structured, because, as you pointed out, it's for the owners, and a minority are owners, and everybody else has to rent themselves out to the owners. Then, however we do address these constraints, is not going to be for the benefit of the producers. So, I guess what I want to look at even more specifically is how, for example, you know, we've talked about money and therefore distribution and exchange, but also how maybe some more democratic productive type practices might have responded perhaps a little differently to the pressures of COVID than some of the larger corporations, poultry producers, or maybe Amazon, who say, okay, well, we'll just use you guys up until you're not needed anymore.
Yeah. That's a beautiful question, and that's a teaching moment.
Yeah.
You know, especially those meat packers, you know, and what they were making the workers do, and all the illness, and they would just show up or lose your job kind of thing. And so obviously in a worker co-op, the workers control, and they decide. So they can try to be safe. They can decide. I mean, the only problem is, Mark, they might, you know, have to feel like they have to produce again because their livelihood. But again, this whole issue, I've been studying the whole issue of COVID and what really is happening. It's not that clear how unsafe we really are, what was really pushed, what's behind it, what's behind the vaccine, how are the pharmaceuticals involved, how's the military biological research involved in generating. I mean, it's really a morass. It's another thing to look at as we try to move forward and not reproduce this. But it's definitely a lesson. Like, workers can make a decision what is good for the workers, that the normal firm does not care unless there is a law that says worker safety or minimum wage, and all those laws have been, you know, undermined. They're not going to care. And it's such, Mondragon in Spain is such a good example of cooperatives where they, I think for many years, they didn't even lose one job. Their number one priority was keeping jobs for people so they could have their livelihood, as you said.
Right. And I mean, you could imagine a scheme with work sharing and, you know, reduced hours, but, you know, all kinds of schemes. And you could imagine, you know, I don't know exactly how you see this as fitting into social solidarity economy. And as you say, there are debates about the role of the state, which is certainly true. I mean, some people would say, we need some kind of set of institutions that might guarantee livelihood even in the absence of work, you know, and, you know, we can't even do that here, evidently. But it would seem to me that would have a role
to interesting play to as well. See if anyone has studied, if there are in any areas like Emilia Romagna in Italy or the Mondragon, how they dealt with COVID.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
That's one of the things you can use as someone who's trying to put out and advocate for these transformations is find examples. It's like that place in Mexico they brought up yesterday that doesn't have police. And they got rid of all the gangs and the drug killings. And they did it without police. So like, oh my God, someplace doesn't have police. So you have these examples and you can, because it's very hard to imagine what isn't there. We have limited abilities to do that as human beings. So examples of what worker co-ops have done with COVID, that would be a great article if you want to write it. Look, you know, you'd have to look.
Yeah,
but I bet you there are some different experiences.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's on my list.
Great, wonderful.
I was curious if folks had thoughts about that. So thanks.
Yeah, any response to that or other questions? Or Catherine, Allison, did you
I have
find
a
any?
question. I don't know how to put my hand up. This is Kathy Mulder.
Oh, hi, Kathy. I hear you. Go ahead.
I have been doing a lot of studying in both Emilia Romagna and in Mondragon, and I spent lots and lots and lots of time there, and Jackson. I'm not going to forget my Jackson, but the difference, one of the main differences between the two European countries and the US is their constitution. And in the constitutions of Spain and Italy, cooperatives are really protected, and they are not here at all.
Mm.
So it's not, that we can't overcome it. It's just that we don't have the backing of the government.
Well, so that's where the laws, if we just ignore making laws in the whole political arena, the laws set the rules for the economy. They always talk, the rightists talk about big government, we're against government, but they're not against the laws that protect private property. They're not against the police that protect their private property and that attack people. They're not against military budget. So it's really the state is super powerful, and it does create this system within which we have to try to survive. So I think some of us have to deal with that unless we can secede and create our own places, which some people did in the 60s. People would they go in the country and try to live all by themselves. They weren't that successful, but I certainly people of color are saying, I'm gonna go back to Africa, I'm getting out of here. This racism is not tolerable. So it's, but as I said, I think it may be a combination of the two. Other points and questions? What do you see, Allison? Any other questions that I'm not seeing? I'm looking for hands. We might be coming to the end. 12:52, exactly, good timing. Don't see anybody. Looking at the, so you think we can stop, Allison?
There's always so much to talk about. Can we do another World Social Forum? Keep going. There's so
yeah.
Thank you.
There are more events happening, and on the flyer, which you probably got, there is a link to registering, and then you can get in the program. It is pretty hard to get through that maze of, I don't know why, but I suspect it might be being subverted in some way, but it's pretty hard to get in, but just keep trying. And there's some very great speakers and events going on through the 1st, which is Wednesday. So I encourage people to do that. And I want to thank everyone for coming and participating in this. It was a real pleasure, honor, and joy to see you all here and to engage in discussion with you. And onward and upward to the world we deserve, as one of my comrades says. So I'm gonna just stay here if people want to hang out and talk afterwards, but I'm going to turn off the recording now, and the formal session I'm going to end. Find out how to stop the recording. There we go. Okay. And then I'm going to wait also with Allison. Okay, stop the recording.